thank you all for joining us here. Who's excited to be talking a little bit about kind of the different change in work, and excited for everyone to come down here and join us. I know there's a lot of different events and talks going on, and we've had a great time actually prepping for this panel and having some conversations, so excited to share with everyone today. We did want to get a little bit of an idea just so we know who we're speaking with in this room. Had a couple of questions. So who in here is on the education side as an educator? Okay, awesome. How about on the HR side as an HR leader in tech company? All right. And how about coming from a company over 1,000 employees? Under 1,000 employees? Okay, yeah, good. So good to kind of know. We're just curious about where we would obviously want to take this conversation. We've got a pretty unique panel up here. We're going to talk and probably let everyone really just introduce their lens a little bit, but we've got folks that have worked in very, very large enterprise and now moved down into more startup companies and just kind of having their views of experience in the changing workforce on both, as well as people building technologies in the space as well. So, really for us, we're going to talk a lot about kind of what is that changing workforce, how are we seeing that at different companies in the lens that we're looking at it, as well as diving into kind of what are some of the biggest problems areas we're seeing, how do we motivate and retain the talent that we have, and how do we just basically have a better alliance between the company and the individuals. So I thought it'd be interesting if we kind of went down the panel this way to just maybe introduce a little bit about your background and kind of the lens that you're coming from company-wise, so people have an understanding of your background.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jonathan Basker. I'm the CEO of Basker & Company. So I run a consulting practice focused around organizational development, HR, and learning and development, mostly for technology startups. And I'd say my average client is probably somewhere between 150 to 350 employees. So pretty early in the organization's life cycle. And the suite of services tends to be a blend of coaching and training and just sort of in the seat executive and strategic assistance for them. I've worked with companies such as Invision, BarkBox, Handy, some others, but my world is very much the startup world.
Thanks, Jonathan. My name is Samantha Rist. I spent the first 21 and a half years of my career in an oilfield services company called Schlumberger. So about 130,000 people, 150 different countries, and did a series of changes, probably about 10 different positions in about 9 different locations over the years. And then about a year and a half ago, I moved to a startup called Katera in the construction space. I'm head of HR there. And we went from about 170 people, and we're now about 1,500 people.
Everyone, my name is Jevan. I started my career at McKinsey & Company. It's a large global management consultancy, and in about 50% business roles and 50% people roles, including North America and Asia Pacific recruiting strategy. And then for the last 5 years, I've flipped it, no longer at a large company, no longer serving Fortune 1000 clients, and have been only at sort of high-growth, smaller companies. So joined Square, a fintech company, about 400 employees, grew them to 1,200. Was a chief people officer at Blue Bottle Coffee for the last few years, and then recently joined an e-commerce crowdsourcing company named Minted up in San Francisco.
I'm Jo, and I lead HR at Omada Health. We are a company focused on helping people live free of chronic disease. And I've been with them for 2 years. They're 250 people. Before that, I spent 17 years growing up and getting a degree in HR every year at Hewlett-Packard. So went from the 300,000 person company to the 250 person company, the 100 strong HR team of vice presidents to the team of 3 people straight out of college. Trying to figure out how we take our product to market and help people live a better life. So quite the transition and experience.
Hey everyone, I'm Vivek. I'm the CEO and founder of HackerRank. We're based in San Francisco. Our goal is to match every developer to the right job based on their skill versus resume. We started in 2013. We were part of the Y Combinator batch. We're now 170 people across Palo Alto, London, and Bangalore.
Curious, I'd love to start the conversation, Jo, with you, obviously just coming out of large enterprise HP and now into startup, and it sounds like a lot of the folks in here are in companies under 1,000. Just curious, what was kind of the main triggers that brought you to do that, and also kind of, what would you say you would look at the workforces in both, and are there big differences, or are there even similarities as you're seeing them kind of converge together?
Yeah, I spent, I'd say probably 16 of my 17 years at HP learning so much about the foundations of human resources, how you build a team, how you scale a team, how you work across international boundaries, and felt like I was always facing a new challenge and a new opportunity, and then my feet hit the end of the runway from a career standpoint, and I couldn't see what was next in terms of what was my next career challenge, what was my next growth opportunity, who was I going to be learning from, and it just kind of like that period just ran out for me. And I'd also spent all of that time partly by luck and honestly saying yes to a number of people that said, hey Joe, would you work on this? Learning the kind of classics of HR. I led the recruiting team across the world. I led and built an M&A team for HR. I was business HR for some of our biggest business units. And I'd had a lot of bets taken on me through my career to that point, and I wanted to actually take a bet on myself and challenge myself to take on everything that HR is responsible for in a company and put it to work. But I, in that transition, faced incredible pushback around my ability because of the time I'd spent in this big, heavy, bureaucratic, slow company to actually make the transition. So I got angry about that and really wanted to challenge myself and challenge the bias around big company to small and also vice versa.
Yeah, definitely. Samantha, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that as well as you looked at the transition. What attracted you to come work for a smaller startup and kind of the parallels that you're seeing?
Well, you know my background. I happened to be tipped for the job. I wasn't looking. So the founder of the company I'm in now is on the board of Schlumberger, and the CEO of Schlumberger is on the board of Katera. So it kind of was offered up as a different opportunity, and I took it. But I'm with Joe. This concept of the bad parts of a big company and being able to think in an entrepreneurial way. But I think the value it brought to me is functioning on or looking at how you'd scale. So because I started in operations and I'd done R&D, I'd done HR, and a different number of roles, that mindset in order to take something from whether it's infancy or toddlerhood up to growing it larger, I think is what I've leveraged coming from a big company. And I think process is not always a dirty word. You want to be nimble and quick, but having frameworks that people can grow up in and you can scale effectively is important.
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm curious, Jevan, because I think the framework, I think that's what we've had a lot of going on in our conversation. And I know, you coming out of McKinsey, you talked a lot about kind of the framework and the model. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what that looked like as well from the McKinsey side and how that's translating?
Hitting at the sort of the tagline of our session, so this learn, earn, and churn idea, and I think the thing that people are wrestling with is this, are we just in different times where the sort of contract between employees around, frankly, loyalty and sticking around and what companies can do for them is just like fundamentally broken down. And one of the things that we were sort of toying with was, McKinsey's entire business model is actually predicated on the idea that most people will leave within probably 2 to 4 years. It's actually just part of the business model. And that makes it hard in some dimensions, but it's actually not hard in other ways, because what happens is you architect the entire culture and actually your entire people operations around that idea. And so it becomes this assumption that, frankly, at best, we can assume that you'll be here for 18 to 24 months. And how do we make those 18 to 24 months as incredibly valuable both for you and for the company as possible? And then a whole different set of things will probably open up to you at the end of those 18 to 24 months, depending on how you've performed and how the company has continued to evolve and the opportunities around that. And what's interesting is I think that actual conception of the experience in the contract is not actually fundamentally different at many companies. So McKinsey, I think, is at the edge of it because the entire business model is around that. But if you talk to folks at large companies, and some of you have grown up with them, within them, that's actually core to sort of how you think about great talent, full stop. Now what I do think has evolved that makes it harder for all of us out there is that the bar has been raised for everybody, right? Because of social media, because of employer branding stuff, people just have a lot more access as employees to knowing what great looks like. And also, I think, for a variety of reasons, sort of don't feel that they have to settle for second best necessarily. And so what does that mean for all of us, regardless of what kind of company we're at, in meeting that demand?
Definitely. Well, and I think that's a good point here, and I'd love to actually hear, Vivek, your opinion on this. You're obviously building software around recruiting engineers. There's probably the most competitive space in the market right now. I'm sure everyone that's on this panel right here is looking for the secret in that, right? So what are you seeing, I guess, in the recruitment side, if we're thinking about, okay, whether someone's coming out of a big company or they're going from small company to another small company, what are some of the trends, what are some of the things that you're seeing, that are really sticking with this workforce as we're looking to in the recruitment side?
Yeah. Well, the irony is all these really fast-growing, cool tech companies have a smaller median tenure for employees compared to what people traditionally call as these large companies, right? I mean, you might think that everybody is choosing to go and work for these private, fast-growing companies because they're fast, you get a lot of learning opportunities. So why is the median tenure, you get ping pong tables, free food, everything that you want, but still the median tenure is low. And it's a tricky balance that we're starting to see. And I think the underlying factor is the rate at which people want to grow, or the rate at which at least you're necessary to grow quickly is continuing to increase year over year. So it's there's almost this sort of, and which is a good and bad thing, there's almost this pressure on the employer that, hey, like you said, if after 24 months, if I'm still doing pretty much the same, or I'm just like slightly above what I was doing when I joined the company, I'm starting to already think of options. Is there something else that I can go ahead and look out? So the bar is just getting higher, and that's something even we've started to realize, because I used to be this person, you know what, I want everybody to work at HackerRank for, I don't know, 5 years. Now I'm just starting to realize that, okay, that's unrealistic. So what can we do to make sure that we can continue to level up? And it should be a balance, because you can't artificially force a promotion and then become a manager and then disrupt the entire organization. But at the same time, like, how do you balance like growth and retention is a hard problem.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
I think the thing that I think I found to be quite different between the established, mature company and the small, high-growth company is the depth of capability around the craft of management, and the ability for a people manager to have a really clear conversation with their team members around, like, what is it you're going to get? To Jevan's point, what are you going to get out of the next 24 months? What are you going to get out of the next 48 months? And also, well, by the way, when we can't stretch you anymore, when we don't have the opportunity, we're going to talk about how we're going to get you ready for the next thing outside of our company, because leaving a company is the greatest taboo when somebody joins a company. It's like all of a sudden everyone's going to stay here forever. Not true. So let's actually engage with each other in that alliance, and talk about our lives rather than these moments and this kind of like misguided belief that people are going to stick with me because they have this job. It's just not true anymore. And I think kind of that comes back to me anyway, to kind of the craft of management and those people leaders really being able to engage, connect, and lead their teams on an individual and on a team basis. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, I think a lot of that too starts with some of our prep as well around transparency and conversations around onboarding. I'm curious, Jonathan, because I know you're working, especially it looks like we have a lot of under 1,000-person companies. What are some of the things that you're seeing unique companies doing from an onboarding perspective?
And the first thing I'll say is, in my world, because you're talking about companies that are somewhere between like 6 months to 2 years old, I strongly agree that the bench isn't as deep in startups in terms of having experienced managers, and that may go all the way up to the CEO. Frequently, a startup founder might be not only in the largest company they've ever worked for, but running it. And so you have this extra challenge where it's not that you can call back to authority who will instantly, innately be like, oh, what you're saying makes sense and I've experienced it. I know what you're talking about. Go ahead and do that thing. So you get to, I mean, I would almost describe it like the whole thing is a dance, but it's less a tango and more like interpretive modern art where people are just flailing around and you know you're trying to express something, but you're just like moving around until you kind of get it. And it's that dynamic, and even if you do get it, it doesn't stay. And so you're constantly reflailing into these new things. And so in that environment, to get somebody in, to get them settled is almost a useless proposition because that settling won't stay. And so I think if there's one thing I can say that powerfully matters in onboarding, it's accounting for the meta conditions under which the person's coming into the job. I've never worked at a company like an HP. The largest company I've ever been a part of was like 350 people, and that was a contract. never stayed at a job for more than 2.5 years. Like I am one of these people that I've never had a mentor. And I used to be proud of that. I now, when I have 25-year-olds that come to me and they're like, I think I can do this on my own, I'm like, it really sucks, and you're not going to get further that way. Go find someone amazing to work for. It'll go better for you. I think bringing people in at the very beginning and just being really honest about what they're buying and what they're not, and having that be a part of the recruiting process. And when you're selling, part of the sale has to be what you're not selling. And then bringing someone in, and on top of many other things that I think would be best practices around onboarding, say, here's what your job is, 30, 60, 90-day plan, all those things.
Yeah.
Really letting someone know this is the ride you're in for, and I want to make sure before we get going that, like, once the bar comes down, you can't get off for a while. I just want to make sure you know that there's like a water feature on this, and if you're allergic to peanuts, this isn't going to go well for you at all. And the ride's under construction, and everything I just said is subject to being completely wrong.
And I'll add a little bit, because we discussed this before, but because I really didn't understand, having been in this other environment, then going to the Valley and realizing, thinking churn is a bad thing, but now understanding, because of the growth that we've had, that some churn is good, because I just need different skill sets. So we've attracted people that have an appetite to do things differently, but not everyone has the capacity to do that. And it's just through taking risks on people, both them on themselves and the company, that then we're realizing sometimes it's a good fit, sometimes it's not. So the key part is just helping them to understand and for us to select the guys that we want out and the ones that we want to retain.
Yeah. No, and I think, a lot of that, again, comes down to, we were talking, you joined at Katera when, 200 people, how many people was it originally?
Less than 200.
Less than 200, and now 2,000 in less than 2 years. You've had 4 or 5 different companies that people are working within that, right? So can you talk a little bit about some of the skills leveling that you need to have in different ways, those conversations and how you're approaching those?
We're realizing that, and I think for the executive team, we overhired, which was a good thing, because we knew that we were going to have this growth. So there was people with very high level of skills that just weren't needed then, that we've engaged with over the last 1.5 years. I didn't really contemplated that we needed to do that 2 or 3 levels down in the organization, but that realization is coming. I think we talked before in terms of what we're even doing with our equity, and we've made our vesting period over 5 years, and now we've made it a 2-year cliff at 40%. So we wanted to sell people up front that we want people to be around for a certain period of time, although that equity is only across a small subset of individuals, because it's construction. So I'm also talking about trade labor. We do manufacturing. We've got a large subset of hourly workers. So it's a big variety of people.
And Jevan, I want to ask you a little bit. I know we were talking about kind of, you had some conversations at Square when you would have, great folks come to you as you're growing, and they're like, I want to go here, and you're kind of like being transparent. I'm not even sure if that position's open or will be created. Talk a little bit about kind of that as well, because you've seen that scale and how you're dealing with that, especially if you have these, hungry young millennials that are like, I can do this job tomorrow. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so there are many things that you can offer at a small high-growth company. One of them is not certainty. Even at larger companies can be scarier now than it was, but I think it's still a structural advantage that larger companies have. And particularly, you can't actually give certainty around career progression, unfortunately. And so I had, when I was leading sales ops, actually I was on the business side at Square, and I had an amazing team of 3 analysts. We just built Square's first sales team to about 60 reps. And we're pausing on the growth for a little bit. And one of them, as a crazy, high-performing, hungry person want to do, said, great, Jevan, what's the 6, 12, 18-month plan for me and all my amazing promotions and so on? Was actually not doing it in an entitled way. He was great. But he was very, very much asking, what's next for me? And I had this moment where I said, do I do a song and dance about what this potential sales ops career path could look like, which I would have to invent on the spot because we didn't have one, or do I just be totally transparent and go for it? And so what I said to him was, look, we're actually not expanding the sales team dramatically in the near future, and that makes sense for the business, and you know that, right? So it probably doesn't make sense for us to expand the sales ops team and to layer the sales ops team. So unless you push me in front of a bus, there's not actually going to be a management role that's sort of, we're good friends, so this was not actually a seat with him. If something happens, then so you can kind of progress, but otherwise that's not going to be a thing. And senior deputy sales director analyst is not going to be a thing either, because we're not that kind of company in terms of layers. And this is the part where you all can walk away and say, Jevan, he was a terribly uninspirational leader. But the next part where we sort of said was, what did you sign up for when you came here? Because you came from a large company. I wanted adventure. I wanted a feeling like everything that I did had direct business impact. I wanted access to leaders. I wanted to really, really feel like I was core to the strategy. And I wanted to feel like I was getting credit for the work that I was doing versus feeling buried in the organization. And I said, okay, do you feel like you're getting that? Yes. You can keep holding us and me particular accountable for that. So what I can't promise you is the certainty of being promoted to the next layer of senior analyst in the next 6 months, which is what you can get in those other places. But what I can promise you is if you keep performing and we keep giving you the work that stretches you and giving you credit where credit is due, great things will happen for you. I have no idea what those great things are. They could mean a promotion. They could mean a lateral move to another team at Square that's really exciting. And they could mean that you get an amazing opportunity outside Square. That would be a second place outcome for me. But if that outcome involves you looking back and saying, Square was fundamental to me getting this job, and I will always look fondly and speak well of the team and of the company from here on forth, that's a huge, huge win. And so that, I think, is, while that's actually the kind of conversation you basically have to have all the time at high-growth companies, because you can't present that certainty, I would actually argue it's increasingly the kind of conversation you actually have to have as managers anywhere. Because people switch careers, people switch functions. The assumption, again, that you come into a company and you stay with a particular path for a decade or more is just fundamentally untrue. And so all of a sudden, we're all actually in these much more human and much more challenging conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Totally.
It just occurs to me as you're thinking about that I think one of the biggest shifts I'd like to see systemically is that we all equate career progression still with title progression, more or less. And that hasn't shifted yet, even though it's not fully true. At least in my world, it's not true. So we have seen in startup land, like technology startup land, we've seen a shift around engineering and design where you now have like parallel tracking, where it's a non-managerial track and you can become a more and more distinguished and capable engineer. And so you can actually stay in your role and still make more money and still have more credibility, authority, access to information. But that's sort of a fledgling thing, and it's very localized and only some organizations do it. It does seem to me that in the end, like, we're fighting a first principle that we ourselves created, which is the way for you to grow is to like move up the ladder, and there really isn't a way for us to grow you if you just stay still, which I actually think is also just inaccurate. In our world where there's that much company growth, if you were managing, let's say you're a manager and you're managing 3 salespeople, and a year later you're managing 8, and a year later you're managing 30, and your title never changed. It's actually staggering to me how often I have to remind someone that that's happening. And kind of what you're just saying, like, oh, right, I am growing. Like, I didn't get a new title. I may or may not have gotten more money, but I'm actually a more capable person who's like done more and done something at a larger scale. And that scale can be an enemy or a friend, but I guess I personally wish that we talked about the whole thing a bit differently.
And I think if people were able to talk about what the intention of the current job, current role, current experience is going to lead to, then maybe we wouldn't see the churning that we see where people are moving too quickly without necessarily getting some good foundations underneath them so that they can be an incredible something in a few years' time. Now that in something may change dramatically by the time you get down that path, but this kind of constant churning and learning because they're fighting the next level, they're fighting the new title, their Stanford peer is the CEO and founder of Snapchat, why haven't they got that? It's like, what's important for you and what do you want your life to be and how do we help you get there and how do we give you the foundations to scale in the future and do even more impactful, more valuable work? And it's this kind of like, don't try and churn and earn without the learning part because you're going to trip yourself up if you're not careful. And that comes back to me, to those conversations that people are having with their managers, with their mentors, with people that they trust.
How do you build the framework to encourage that? Because I know you've done a lot, even within the HR community, open sourcing some of the stuff you're doing on the leadership development side. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've really struggled to have the conversation with our people managers around having a discussion with your team members about the next job. So how do you maximize your time at Omada Health? And how do we maximize the contributions that you can make in this period? But equally, how do we help you get to that next thing? And how do we have a conversation whereby I'm helping you get there while maximizing your contribution at our company, and you're therefore not going to surprise me with a 2-week, if we're lucky, resignation. And when that happens, for me, when somebody surprises their manager with a resignation that they didn't see coming, or they weren't having a conversation with them on, or classify them as a regrettable attrition, that's bad. Like, that's on us.
Yeah.
Like, we messed that up. But every time I have that conversation with our people managers, it's getting easier, but the kind of the deer in the headlights look of, you want people to leave Omada Health? I'm like, no, I don't want people to do that unless it's good for them.
Yeah.
And I want you to be engaging with them about what is good for them and what type of experience do they need next here or elsewhere, so that we can grow our community and not be surprised by it.
I think I would just jump in on that. I think that the challenge has been that often managers are not leading with the thesis around development, right? So the thesis around your career progression is actually specific to how my function is structured, how my team is structured, and the promotion cycle.
Yeah.
But it's actually not, what is my thesis around how you can grow that is towards your specific goals, and if you have a hypothesis around the kinds of next opportunities you'd like to grow into, what you actually need to get into there, and then making that thesis transparent to the employee, right? So you can kind of come up with it and then not actually share it. And that's actually hard work. It's different work. That's a different way of thinking. I'm constantly surprised at relatively sophisticated people leaders when I push them on this point and they actually haven't thought it through.
Also adding to that, one thing that I've noticed is, at least this is a luxury that startups have, is to really explain the business impact that they can have directly to the company. I mean, oftentimes we always want to portray we're the greatest company on the planet, we're just going to win all the time. But I've started to realize, or it started to actually work out really well when you explain the risks of the business. Because you're always paranoid, oh, if I'm going to explain all the risks of the business, was it going to be, I mean, you have to do a balance. You can't be super paranoid about the company yourself and enough for people to not show up the next day. But at the same time, if you're able to explain, here's how we're thinking about the business, here's the landscape, here's our strategy, and here's how we're doing, and here are all the risks that we're working to solve. Frankly, it's really motivated people to know, okay, now I understand why we are doing this initiative, now I understand why we're doing this and why we have to do it in this particular timeline for me to go ahead and do it. And that's a great luxury that you have as a startup. It's going to be really hard to do it for a large company. That's another way of retention or growth that people can really feel, okay, I'm going to do this because we have to solve this risk, and here's how I'm going to help you.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I think to Joe's point on that too, around, you know, the transparency of everything, right? I mean, if you're able to, you know, really be forward and say, look, this is what we're gonna really want you to accomplish. This is what we're gonna, you know, look at as successful. And by the way, if we can't find you what that next thing is, you know, if we deliver this, and what do you need to get this done? We deliver this, then, you know, you have just as much our blessing as long as you give us a 5-6 week notice, so you're not leaving us hanging, right? And then you have everyone really working together. And often, I mean, how many times are we seeing this on this panel where you're working with someone and then 4 years later you're working with them again in a whole another place, right? So I mean, even just that social capital, I think, is really important.
And surprisingly, the more you share, the better it is. I mean, I used to, again, be worried, okay, so we share our board deck. I actually walk through the board deck. Here's what we talked to the board. Here's what the board actually told. We actually we have this channel where we open source all of our e-staff meeting notes that we have every week. We actually say, here's what we discussed, here are the action items. Of course, there are always sensitive things, right? You don't want to know what my salary is or options and all of those things. Like, there is information that is worthy of sharing to people, which will help them understand the context better and make decisions. And it's really surprising that the more you share, I don't know when it's going to break. We're 180, we'll probably get to like 300 this year. So maybe it might break at 300 or 400, I don't know. But until that point, like, my goal is, hey, just share as much as possible, because it just helps people to understand the full context.
Yeah, I would actually not argue against that, but offer an alternative, which someone said this to me. This is not my original thought, but it blew my mind years ago, which is that there's an important distinction to make between transparency and clarity. And I think what you said includes clarity, is sort of like you have both there. But I do think a lot of companies get tripped up because they feel like they're sharing so much information and they don't understand why people are complaining about transparency. And I think because they're actually not. What they're complaining about is it's not clear to me what's going on around me. And that's a much smaller data set explained with like a narrative overlay. And I think that's an important part too that has to exist company-wide. I need to be able to know that this is where the company's going, and this is why, this is where we are on that journey, and these are the threats. And I also need to be able to draw a line all the way down to my internship on like how I connect to that, and what my threats are, what my opportunities are. And, if I can pile on my own thought, I used to be really fond of saying that retention shouldn't be a goal, but alignment should be. And I've become a big believer that people are, variable. Like we all sort of have an ebb and flow to our capability. Some days you're up, some days you're down. And over the course of a career, and certainly any given time in a company, I think you have this arc where you come in all gung-ho. Hopefully you sort of rise in your energy, your commitment, your excitement. That excitement might come from learning. It might come from being fluent in something and getting to express that fluency. But eventually it comes to an end. And we're all pretty bad at creating an open, safe place for the moment when it comes to an end. So we actually have built into our own systems a lot of waste, where you have someone that you then have to go and manage and motivate. And nothing's wrong with anyone except for the fact that their job is done. They're done with it. Like they're not into it anymore. And I feel like what we're all after at the end of the day is like this magic system where you have this strong recruiting engine that can bring you the right people at the right time in the right way, which sounds to me about like if I was just sitting here describing Santa Claus to you, but it sounds nice. And it's, I think, what we're all after. And then you have a cream of the crop extraction organization. Like we're only getting the best of you, but that's a relative thing. That's what we mean when we get what we need from you, what you need from us. And that's alignment. Like we're aligned in what this whole thing is supposed to be. And then this beautiful, dignified offboarding where it's a big hug and thank you for your time and go along the way. And, I've never seen anyone come super close to that. I'd be curious to know if you guys have, but I've seen companies make real efforts at it, and I've seen it be incredibly impactful, not even to succeed, but just for people to see you truly try.
But if I go back, I'll add a little bit. I think to your other question in terms of framework and building on what you said, Jonathan, is that clarity and transparency for the big picture, where the company's going, down to that individual. And what we've tried and are building in Katera is a framework and a dialogue so that someone can contemplate current state for themselves. So current state, future state. So we've set up our performance management system, we're setting up our leadership framework so people can self-serve if they have that clarity and transparency, because I think people make choices to leave when they don't see in front of them choices that will serve their development. So if you can always have people think, okay, what's going to serve yourself and the business, that's where you get alignment. And you need to, and we talked before about having, because everyone has internal dialogue, and so what you need to is to make it an external dialogue and get down to what is it that you really want. I mean, back to this, when people have conversations with me about promotions, do you have autonomy? Are you learning? Have you been challenged? Like, what do you actually want? Is it truly the title? Because that may be a misfit. So I think it is creating the nomenclature a little bit of not a rigid framework, but a framework to know that those conversations are happening. Yeah. And imparting the skill sets for those people who are first-time managers that just don't know, how to have the conversations, when to have the conversations, the cadence, right, the frequency of having those conversations. To get to the point of just doing it, we talked about ticking the box before, because eventually they'll understand why they're having those conversations. And I think that's where we want to get managers, because it's really the managers that keep people in companies and are really focused on developing them as individuals because they know it's going to be the right thing for the business.
And talk a little bit, because I know we had talked about this before around, there's no, Jonathan just described the perfect world for everyone, and we're all saying it's probably not that easy to make that happen. You're talking a lot about building a framework for people to work within, right, which is great because you're giving them some guidance but allowing them to move in there. But also, I think we're trying to solve all these things, but a lot of times failure is like the best way to learn, right? So talk a little bit about, kind of how you view that and letting people fail still these days, right, so they can continue to learn things within the organization, because I think you guys do some great stuff there too.
Was this building on another?
No, you were talking about fast tracking learners, right? And like,
Oh,
and how I mean, I think where you're talking about the framework, right?
I'm not a big fan. We always talk about fast track chaining. You have to, people need to fall on their face. We all do, and that's probably where we learn most, because we don't often take the time when we're really successful to digress on that and ask ourselves, why are we so successful? We just kind of enjoy the moment. And I think I was referencing before, some of my team members, when you can see it's going to go awry and you just kind of let it play out, when there's not huge business risk, because one, it's rather humbling, and two, there's some great lessons learned. We try and do some case studies so that you can learn from others, but your own failures are just the best learning opportunity.
I think I'd add to that is I think a lot of great learning can be had in a lot of lateral movement. So I would suspect that Joe and Samantha would agree on their journeys. You know, I stayed at McKinsey for almost a decade. Not all of those moves were straight up. A number of them were diagonal, a couple of them were even kind of sideways. But there was something about that experience that was really compelling for me and ultimately compelling for the business as well. And I think there's something about a lateral move or a slightly diagonal move that also makes the failure feel a little bit less scary for everyone involved, because you're like, yeah, we're moving someone to a completely different function. We're moving them to a different geography. Of course, that's kind of crazy, but it's not the same as something, I think, as promoting straight up and then seeing what happens. It's actually something we do quite a bit at my current company, Minted. We're playing with this idea of radical rotation, where we really look for someone's sort of core superpowers and then think, where can this be applied across the business? And that means a little bit more work for the people team and for the exec team. But I think what's really powerful about it, both for the business, but then also just seeing these people light up, because they feel really seen, right? It's like, wow, you spent extra time sort of cutting through the noise to really just think about what lights me up, where have we seen these superpowers really in play, and where else in the business do we think you can grow and put them into practice?
And I think people are more open to self-proclaim what they know and what they don't know, and the strengths they bring to the table. And it helps the team around them support them and, again, develop, right? That if you take a seasoned individual who's been there, done that, they're expected to know everything. And the reality is if they're coming to a new business, they don't, right? I mean, it's not viewed as a lateral move, but you're gearing up the organization to provide that support and the additional learning.
What are we seeing, I guess, you know, with all these moves and the quick changes? I'm curious about what you guys are seeing as some of the biggest skills gap in the market right now. I mean, is it, you know, a lot around communication skills? Is it a lot about just, you know, not having the training to be in this, you know, VP title level? I'm just curious about what are some of the trends you're seeing in skill gaps across the companies you're working with?
The one I see the most kind of consistency around, and I'll harp on about this until the cows come home, is people leadership, is just the craft of sitting with your team members, coaching them, mentoring them, helping them think through a problem, supporting them, challenging them, throwing them at the deep end, and being there to kind of pull them out when they get stuck. I find that is across all functional disciplines, across all kind of tenures and ages, to be a real issue, particularly within younger companies where you don't always have deep experience. And that's perhaps the reason why they're so successful. Oh, excuse me. Because the experience in a larger company can sometimes hold us back because you're like not challenging yourself anymore. But I think kind of the craft of coaching and mentoring and being a partner to somebody as their manager is a huge ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
I totally second that. Management 101, and I'm not talking about managing the P&L, I'm talking about managing a team and getting them to develop and work as a team to achieve a business goal.
I will say, as someone that runs Management 101 classes, I don't love it when I blow people's minds on really basic stuff.
Right.
And it happens every single time.
Have a one-on-one.
And people are just like, whoa, I've never thought about that before. I'm like, I know. That's why we're here. It's causing real problems. You're the VP of sales, and a lot of people's lives are mostly tied to yours during the workday, and you're kind of making them upset. That's obviously an internal monologue, but I agree 100%. I think for me, the subset skill that I think is most lacking, or at least if there's one thing that I try and shift in an organization if I come in, it's the relationship to giving and receiving direct feedback. and shifting from a framework of I'm going to wait till you get in trouble and then I'm going to do something about that. And that something might be really nice. I might sit you down and be like, hey, Robby, that didn't go so well. Let's talk about it. But very few people, like, while they're watching you, burn dinner, to use like a cooking metaphor, walk over and be like, just so you know, like, just to build on that, like, that's about to burn. And very, very, very few people build a place where you could come to me even before that and say, hey, I'm about to do this next step, and I've never done it before, and I'm pretty afraid of messing up the souffle. And for my reaction to be like, well, let me help you with that. Or for my reaction to be like, I can't help you with that, man. I got like my own souffle to work on. It's kind of expected that you're going to figure that out for yourself. And it's natural to not want to get into direct conflict with people. It's natural to like not want to take on extra effort and be less effortful in your job. And I don't think we do a very good job at all of fighting that natural inertia.
We're about to roll out how to have tough conversations in our sort of management 101, because the amount of, it's flabbergasting that no one's willing to just sit and be like, you messed that up, or let me help you, or it.
Building those skills, yeah. Anyone else doing anything interesting to build those skills on the training side as far as kind of advice to give to other companies? Like how do you approach that? How do you bring that in? Is it a trainer that comes in, or are there ways that you can actually build in peer mentorships? I'm just curious on what everyone's doing at their companies.
Yeah, I think at the core of it, alignment is the biggest thing that needs to happen before we can actually have all of these practices to take effect. For example, if your E-team is not clearly aligned on the strategy and the goals, then it doesn't cascade to the rest of the org. Then it's just going to get really. Then the expectations get mismatched. Then something is broken, and then the people are not willing to have the hard conversations. I think alignment at scale is. I almost like, actually we are going through like the VP of people search. So one of my core criteria is sort of, can you, and it has to come from me or it has to come from the CEO, but like, can you help the E-team and the entire company be aligned at scale? Frankly, like if everybody in the organization knows, here's the mission, here's the strategy, here's how I'm contributing to the strategy, and here's how it's the mission, like a giant set of problems I feel like will just go away, like in the company. Like, people will be able to give feedback. People will know, okay, I actually messed up here, tell me what's going on. That sort of cascading is being hard, and like that's one of the things that we're focusing and we're continuously getting is, let's get the E-team aligned, and then let's get the managers aligned, and let's get everyone aligned. I feel that'll have a huge impact on the productivity of the company.
Yep. Definitely. And how do you see that? I mean, from a technology standpoint, I'm just curious how we can build this in. I know there's a lot of different performance tools, right, that you can tie in around those alignments, those goals, right, where you're actually doing this in real time and continuous feedback. So I'm curious to hear how you guys are utilizing technology as well and see the possibilities with that. Yeah,
I'd love to know from people. We still are in Excel. I've still not found a really amazing tool that does this well. So you know what? We actually put everything on Excel. And I've still not been able to figure out a good performance review system. I've asked multiple people. Each of them has their pros and cons. But there isn't yet a clear system that's probably very customizable to the company, which allows everybody to know, here's where I am, here's where the company's going, and here's the feedback that I got and my rating. I mean, there are, of course, like performance management systems, but there's nothing that has at least fit right for us at a growing company yet. Yeah.
I will say, maybe it's telling, I don't think I've ever spoken to a single HR professional around the topic of performance management, and their answer was like, oh yeah, we figured that out, we're happy with what we got.
Yeah. We're trying out Glint. I don't know if you've heard of it, but we're about to do a beta test, because they're an engagement for pulse surveys or engagement surveys, and they're now doing performance management. But what I found recently that had worked, and now I've tried it with a population of originally like 300 and a subset of 100, because I'm a big fan of, my ideal system is crowdsourcing of performance management. So for this case of 90 on our design side, it was just, we selected 12 individuals and had those, whoever they dealt with across this team, I don't want to use rank, but if one is kicking ass and 3 is not where the individual needs to be, we ranked people 1, 2, and 3, and then combined those. And I initially did it last March when we were going through our merit raise, June actually, probably across 300 people. And when I started and I said, look, I know this is tough, but I'll do it for mine. And then sent it to the other executives, and they did it for anyone they interacted with. And when I collated the information, the guys that were basically 2.5 or more, of that subset of probably 10, 4 were already being pushed out, and we made individual plans for the others. Because sometimes there's a mismatch of skills, sometimes there's a mismatch of role, and it was really effective. And we found for this design team, because we're about to do a reorg there, that has worked really well. And the other thing I look for is mismatches. So there were some that are ranked, 1, let's say, by their manager, and 3 by someone else who dealt with that individual. And I'm like, if there's a mismatch, clearly I'm expecting you to have that conversation because it's just not working.
Yeah.
I think the flip side of that is, for the ones that are 1, I want to look at the high performers to make sure that we're feeding them to give them the right level of engagement.
Yeah.
But that's the direction I'd like to go in.
You can stop looking for the best tool though, because it's never going to exist.
But we're doing it on Excel.
It's never going to exist because performance management has so many tentacles across so many parts of the company that actually it's like, what do you want performance management to be in your company, and how do you want your leaders to lead through that? And then your system is there just to help you scale. I think the biggest mistake we all make, and I've made it many times, is thinking that the technology is going to be the enabler. And it actually gets in the way if you don't think about, like, what do you want it to feel like and what's the experience going to be. And there are good tools out there that can help you scale, but you can't bypass the role of the people leaders.
Okay, that's the conclusion I got to. So,
Excel's pretty good.
Companies with great performance cultures, companies with great mission and goal clarity, a lot of time they're actually not using anything besides Excel too. It just really comes down to being very, very crisp around that executive table, and then I think really making sure each line of leaders going down the chain feel equally clear and invested. And if you get that right, it's actually pretty much most of the battle.
I do think on performance management, it's one of the strongest signals you send culturally, maybe the strongest. And it's one of the few areas where I have a mixed view on training as an L&D tool, and we talked about this a little bit at breakfast this morning. And in fact, Jevan had a good counter argument, which is it depends on how effective and well put together the training is. But I think performance management is one of those places where if I'm going to make an investment, I'm going to make it in the training that leads up to the performance management moment. Because a bad manager will mess up an amazingly designed performance management system, or an unprepared manager. And a prepared and really amazing manager will figure out how to hack my terrible performance management system into a useful, productive, healthy conversation with their employees. And so just training everyone on what the difference is between those two things looks like, that's what will get you what you want.
It's management
which tool
101.
you use. What's that?
Management 101.
It's management 101. And I will say, just as a thing that I found really effective, I always just ask for a headline from the manager. Like, give me the context under which you're delivering this feedback, and give it to me as a direct statement, and it looks something like, you're doing amazing, this is what would make you pretty much the top performer in the company, versus you're doing pretty well, but these 2 or 3 things really need to get leveled up before we talk about your promotion, versus these are pretty serious problems. If they don't get fixed, we're probably going to start having a different and more serious conversation soon. And I make them put that in literally the headline for their feedback.
That's awesome. We're coming up on the last minute kind of countdown here. I'm just curious if anyone wants to add any last minute thoughts of kind of, will this trend continue over the next 5 years? Where do you see kind of, are we even going to be coming down to shorter, even year stints at places? Is it going to be more into the gig economy, contractor work? I'm just curious if anyone, wants to add a couple final thoughts on where they see this going.
I think it's going to continue, and I think kind of the challenge that we have as organizations is to push against the speed of the churning that happens and actually invest in good old-fashioned conversations, planning, destination building, and kind of clear outcomes for people. And I think that's really hard in fast-growing, fight for survival companies, but you have to find the balance. Like, you have to move fast but invest deeply in the long term.
Yeah, I think companies will be way more distributed in the future.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if I can say this, but like if I really look at the pros and cons, I'm not sure if Silicon Valley is the best place to start a company. Right? I'm from India. I came to Silicon Valley 5 years because I was like allured by all the magic. But if you really look at the cost of living, talent density, median tenure, perks that you need to offer, you put in all the pros and cons, I'm not really sure, right? And maybe in 5 years I will say it's not the right place. So I think companies, my view is they'll just become more and more distributed. Your access to talent pool is just higher. And if you do that, your core framework should be to get everybody aligned in a distributed scale. So that'll be the biggest challenge to figure that out.
That's hard.
That's hard,
That's really
that is
hard.
hard. Yeah.
I would just say that I hope that it does. I think if we can figure it out, we actually end up in a healthier place, a more honest place, and a place that actually tracks closer to the individually experienced reality of an employee, where we're just all honest about the fact that you're only going to be here for a period of time. And again, like we'll give you a big hug on the way out, and maybe we'll see you again in a couple of years.
Yeah, there's this anecdote. I swear it was a real person, but now I'm worried that I keep repeating an urban legend. But there's a CEO that apparently was famous for talking to new employees on their first week and saying, what's the next company you're going to? What's the next job you're going to after this? Which, of course, terrifies anyone who's like, is this a test? Am I getting fired by the CEO? But it really wasn't, because he basically said, let's explode this taboo, to Joe's point, right? Let's explode this mythology. Most people will go to another company, right? And so by being really honest and upfront about that, it actually creates an incredible positive and trust-filled environment. It's actually counter to, I think, what a lot of executives and managers are scared of. It actually counters your fear and your emotion and goes in the opposite direction. So I'm actually incredibly optimistic if many of us can embrace this trend in a way that's thoughtful.
That's awesome. Well, on that positive note and the red card over there, we'll end on that. But thank you all for spending the time, and thank you, panelists. So.